you've seen lots of videos of me on the CBR1000 Fireblade supercharged bike at Santa Pod. Been having great fun there. To turn an already good bike into a great bike, we're running a good 250 horsepower with our little C15 supercharger. And this video is about how it's fitted and what the parts look like, and give you a bit of an insight of what you've got to do to get it on the bike and get running. Right, so the beautiful part of the supercharger kit, unfortunately, is under the tank. It's a work of art. The plenum chamber is 5-axis CNC machined. It is not a cheap component to manufacture. So we tooled up and we made 10 of these to make it viable. So I need you guys to get your money out your pocket and start buying these CBR1000 Fireblade supercharger kits. This is the plenum chamber. As you can see, it fits sweetly underneath the tank. We need to just relieve that area a little bit, just give it a little dunk with a ball peen hammer, just to relieve it just a fraction, to get the fuel pipe up from underneath to this top run of injectors to the fuel rail. It's a minor little donk just to take the pressure off the fuel rail. ECU on these bikes is really small, and we're retaining it with this little aluminium bracket. The air temperature sensor is here. Fuel rail, fuel injectors, fuel line comes up from the bottom row of fuel injectors. Wiring harness all clipped in nicely. Underneath here, there's a bracket for the map sensor. So you put the map sensor on underneath there before you put the plenum chamber in place. Inside the bottom half of the plenum chamber, we retain the plenum chamber to the throttle bodies using the original bell mouths. They have 3 screws holding 2 bell mouths in each side. We'll look at that in a moment, but that holds everything in place. So that's the plenum chamber. The air comes from the supercharger, the little C1560 down here. That comes up in front of the radiator, through the hole in the frame, and connects up just with a silicone hose. It goes up from 57mm up to 63mm in pipe size. We're trying very hard to keep the airflow up, so we're keeping the pipe work as big as possible. And that's very straightforward to fit. 6 bolts hold the plenum chamber to the throttle bodies, bit of silicone hose. Air pipe goes all the way down here and connects up to the supercharger outlet just here. Now, supercharger drive is a nice little tooth belt drive here. We keep the original clutch cover for this side, but we take out the inspection cover, which is a round boss. We just spin that undone. When we have to take the clutch cover off to put the dry spigot inside. The dry spigot comes through the inspection cover. We put it all back in place, and then we screw in another inspection cover. That is the bearing and seal to keep the spigot in place. We then put a bolt through the pulley, through the spigot, and torque it up into the end of the crank. Then, to hold the supercharger in place is a simple steel bracket with an aluminium boss behind. This goes into the cylinder head mounting point. So we supply you with a new bolt, the spacer, the bracket. The supercharger is bolted with 4 bolts, 2 top, 2 bottom. The pulley comes ready assembled on the supercharger, so you don't have to mess around fitting that. And then it's a case of putting an oil tank somewhere to supply the oil to the supercharger. So with this, we are, the oil tank is on the other side of the bike, but here's the intake for the supercharger oil, and the outlet is there. So when you put the supercharger in place, before you put it in place, put the oil line and banjo bolt and tighten it up and put it in there, because you won't get to it once the supercharger is hanging off the bracket. So make sure you put a length of pipe and a banjo and bolt it all together on that side, so it's just hanging free, so you can feed it to the oil tank or into oil cooler when you follow the oil circuit round. So round this side, we come round this side, The oil tank for the supercharger is hanging just here. It's been really difficult to find somewhere to put the supercharger tank, simply because the tank has to be lower than the supercharger. So with exhaust systems, everything round here, this is the best place we can find. It's secured at the top to a bolt there, and this bracket comes up and is bolted to the rear of the foot peg. And that works a treat. It's really solid. The filler for the oil tank is there. There's a hose. This hose goes all the way up, right up here through the frame. So it's all the way up here, round here, and it's just sat up here. Now the reason for that, we've also got a filter at the end for the sake of it. So we've got a filter on the end. Now this supercharger, when we're on full chat, returns the oil back to the tank at some velocity. So by running the oil pipe all the way up here and keeping it up out of harm's way, we stop oil getting pushed out of the breather. So in this case, the breather is also the filler. So we fill up from here. And then, Davey, if you want to come around here, we undo this. This is a level gauge. So we undo that bolt. So when we filled up, and it's filled up to here, so it comes all the way along here, the oil will drip out of there. So once it's up to that level and dripping out, we tighten that back up. And then when we do start the bike, run it for a few minutes and then top up again, so that we know that there's plenty of oil in, because the oil has to go round the circuit through an oil cooler, which is at the top of the radiator. So it's a little 6-row, 135mm oil cooler. So you go from the oil tank through the oil filter, which is sat just here. So from the oil tank on the other side, round here, through the filter, around to the inlet of the supercharger, out of the supercharger, up through a one-way valve. See, we've got a one-way valve just here. This goes up to the oil cooler, what we've just seen, out of the oil cooler, and then back to the top of the tank. The only thing left is fitting the air filter. So the supercharger comes with a modified intake. We weld a pipe down here to the inlet of the supercharger. You can see the little shiny pipe. That gets us the air pipe behind the exhaust system, behind the headers. So from the inlet of the supercharger, we put a pipe in from this side that locates with the pipe on the inlet of the supercharger, locates on the top engine mount to stabilize it, and then we put the K&M filter on the outside. So there's very little cutting of bodywork on this side, just enough to let that pipe through. And it's got plenty of ground clearance, plenty of surface area, so there's no restriction in airflow to the supercharger. Okay, so you can see that the oil filter is not in the original place. So that we could get the supercharger air intake through without too much difficulty, we decided a relocation bracket was required. So this is the bracket that brings the oil filter from its original place down here. Now, that in itself is quite a work of art to get everything in. So this is a little bracket. Got oil galleries running through it. So we put a banjo bolt through there into the original oil filter location in the engine, and then bring this round so it's furthest away from us and put the oil filter in there. Banjo bolt, oil filter, and that little bit of distance enables us to get the air intake through from the left side to the right side to the supercharger. Nice, neat little piece. Okay, so we've talked about the oil filter relocation plate. Don't need to mention that anymore. It's pretty straightforward. These are the other parts that go into making this all work. So this is a little C15 supercharger. That runs to 150,000 RPM. It's not hanging around. So we're only running 9 PSI of boost, so it's not outrageous, but we're still getting at least 250 horsepower, which is phenomenal. Bracket, little bracket, bolts up there. And then to tension it, we've got a slotted bolt that sits in there, sorry, a slot where the bolt sits in, and you can see exactly where that fits on the bike. Supercharger, drive spigot, nice little machine part, hexagon drives on the back of the starter clutch. So that goes, you take the clutch cover off first, put that on, put the clutch cover back on. Then we've got an outrigger bearing with a seal, and that slides in there. You can see how that goes, pretty straightforward. Put a little dob of silicone sealer on the thread so that you don't get any oil finding its way around the thread. So that makes it oil tight. A little seal on this side. And then we've got the drive sprocket. Drive sprocket is hex drive, all made in-house at TTS, and that locates on there. Bolt goes in. Put some nice amount of Loctite. We use 2701, which is a really strong Loctite. So if you put that on and torque this up to 65 foot-pound, so that's 65 foot-pound you need to torque that to, okay? As you can see, the plenum chamber is a really beautiful piece of work. We have an O-ring groove around here, put a little 2mm O-ring all the way around to seal the two halves together. That is for a blow-off valve. We have found with just running 9 pound of boost, we actually don't need to run a blow-off valve. So when you get this, you'll find that we've got a blanking plate on there because at the boost pressure we're running, it's just an extra part to get in the way. We don't need it. Like I said, the bell mouths fit in here. All the original bell mouth locations, spigots all locate in these holes. Bolts go through, tighten it all up, and that sits there quite nicely. And then that sits on the top, bolts all the way round with the O-ring underneath. Your 4 injectors. Your ECU sits here. And that's about it, really. As far as engine management is concerned, we use Woolwich Racing ECU software. It works really, really well. To get enough fuel through the injectors, we actually run the fuel pump, the standard fuel pump in the tank, flat out. We don't meter it down to 4 bar or 3 bar. We let it run flat out, which is about 8 bar. And running 8 bar, the fuel injectors survive okay. We've not had any problems with injectors weeping or flooding or anything like that. They're very good quality, and the injectors seem fine. And we've mapped with that fuel pressure, and we get all the fuel we need to run 250 plus horsepower. So there isn't a great expense of running bigger injectors or bigger fuel pump. The stock Honda parts are man enough for the job. I think that's quite amazing, but we've given this CBR1000 a real good run now. It's been on the road for quite a while. It's been at the drag strip. It's done a lot of dyno work, and the bike has run faultlessly. So we're more than confident that the way we've designed it is perfectly okay for the job. So with all the horsepower, the best thing you can do to make it more drivable is drop a couple of teeth off the back sprocket. You do that, you're gearing it up a little bit, and it makes a remarkable difference to the way the bike rides. You're able to ride the wave of torque that the bike produces, and this produces 111 foot-pound of torque. Standard bike makes 70, so you can ride on the torque in a high gear, and it makes it a very nice, easy bike to ride. There's no power band as such. It just keeps pulling and pulling and pulling right to the rev limiter, just like all our supercharger kits do. It makes it a wonderful thing to ride.